Hey, what's happening, friend? Big Dog Ethan here. You're listening to WMTS 88.3 FM in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And, well, this is none other than the unnatural state of affairs. Where in the first hour, I talk politics, and in the second hour, I play some banging tunes for you. So I've really only got one big thing to chat with y'all about today, and that big thing, of course, is the Mike Pence event. It was a thing. It happened, and needless to say, it was an absolute fucking disaster. Of course, the Honors College and MTSU administration, of course, they're not going to say that out loud. But, yeah, it was an absolute train wreck of an event, in my opinion. And I should note, I don't think that's a sentiment that is like a dominant sentiment among the student population and the MTSU community. I think there were a decent amount of people who, whether or not they agreed with Mike Pence, they still like the prestige of having a former vice president come to our campus and talk to us. So anyways, I'm going to get into all of that because, yeah, there's a lot to discuss. So, yeah, that Mike Pence event, it was something. It was something for sure. I'm going to go over this whole shit show in chronological order, but just so I'm not burying the lead here, yes, your very own Big Dog did get to ask Mike Pence a question. As you would expect, it was a hardball question, and yes, the dude squirmed. Metaphorically speaking, I grabbed him by the hair and slammed his smug little face into a brick wall. Now, as I covered a couple of weeks ago, Mike Pence was set to come to MTSU's campus last Tuesday. The Honors College, quote unquote, the American Democracy Project, hosted this event. They invited Mike Pence onto our campus to be interviewed for this Defining Democracy event. Now, in the last segment that I did on the event about a couple weeks ago, I detailed my and the YDSA's argument against the event, and I also read MT Lambda's statements. You can find those posts in the sources section down below if you're listening to or watching this segment on the Kennel. I'm not going to go over those again, so if you want to know what they were saying, that's where you can find that information. Now, the press coverage leading up to the event demonstrates a blatant disregard on behalf of school administration for students' concerns surrounding the event. This comes from the Tennessean. Quote, former Vice President Mike Pence is set to speak at Middle Tennessee State University Tuesday on Defining Democracy as part of the university's annual Constitution Week organized by the university's American Democracy Project. The choice has brought pushback from some student groups, but university administration has emphasized the choice is an example of the university's dedication to free expression and, quote, nonpartisan, or, quote, not partisan, unquote. Just wanted to be correct there in my reading there. Now, already, I'm going to call out some bullshit from the administration. In all three posts made by the two student organizations criticizing the event, none of them accused the administration of trying to push some kind of partisan agenda. Like, none. Both the organizations' argument against the event was essentially this. Yeah, he did the bare minimum to protect democracy. That doesn't mean we should treat him as a credible perspective for defining democracy when he himself supports patently anti-democratic policies and engages in the legalized corruption that undermines our democracy. and that's among his other homophobic, transphobic, and psychotic policy positions. Neither of these organizations accuse the administration of supporting or endorsing Pence or the Republican Party. So, if the administration isn't even addressing either student organization's issue with the event by making the unnecessary reassurance that the event is nonpartisan, why are they even saying that? Again, we, the student organizations, made no accusations of bias or of trying to push a partisan agenda. In other words, why is the MTSU administration concerned about people seeing this as a partisan effort when literally no one has made that accusation? Why are they bringing up the issue of partisanship? Now, some might say, well, they're just trying to cover their ass because it could get in a lot of trouble for appearing to endorse a political party or political view. But again, no one made that accusation, so they didn't need to defend themselves on that front. So, yeah, I think the administration had a Freudian slip and told on themselves there. I must say, I appreciate the honesty. Back to the article, though. Quote, MTSU throughout the years has hosted speakers representing a wide spectrum of beliefs, perspectives, and points of view. MTSU President Sidney McPhee said in a statement, quote, I have long held that providing a welcoming environment for the free expression of ideas is essential for preparing students to become successful scholars, engaged citizens, and well-rounded human beings. Further down here, McPhee said principles the university adheres to dictate that it is not the university's role to, quote, attempt to shield individuals from ideas and opinions that they may find, quote, offensive, unwise, immoral, indecent, disagreeable, conservative, liberal, traditional, radical, or wrong-headed, unquote. Yeah, I'm gonna show you a little clip from one of my favorite podcasters, Kyle Kulinski here.
It's not my free speech! My free speech! It's my free speech! You hate free speech! All right.
Yeah, so that's basically to sum up President Sidney McPhee's. That's basically to sum up his response right there. Just whining about how free speech is the main reasoning behind this. As I noted in a recent post that I made to the kennel, I was naive enough to think that we didn't need to nip this lame-ass rebuttal in the bud in our post, but it seems the administration here thinks we're that stupid, so I'm going to make this abundantly clear. This is not a free speech issue. Mike Pence, like every other U.S. citizen, has the right to stand on a street corner and spout his shitty fucking views. This issue revolves around whether the university should have invited Mike Pence for an event where, ostensibly, he would define democracy for us. More on that in a few minutes. The student organizations brought up valid points, but the administration failed to rebut those in any appearances in the press. If they said something along the lines of, well, no one is perfect at upholding democratic principles, or these arguments don't necessarily demonstrate why he lacks credibility to define democracy, at least I could come on here and say, hey, they're engaging with our specific criticisms, but they're not even doing that. The Honors College Dean, Dr. John Vile, further demonstrates an inability or even unwillingness to engage with our criticisms. Quote, we decided that Pence would be a good Constitution Day speaker, especially in light of the important role that he played in certifying the 2020 presidential election, a decision that went against his own political interest and likely spared the nation a great deal of turmoil, Vile said, unquote. As the article explains further below, we understood this rationale and addressed that. Our point was that, quote, one instance of doing the bare minimum to preserve our pseudo-democratic system does not automatically make him, Pence some enlightened beacon of democratic principles, unquote. Dr. Weil never addresses that criticism. So, in their comments to the press, at least, the university showed no concern about what the rest of the student body thinks about this event. Ironically, when planning this Defining Democracy event, as they failed to even address the specific claims made by the two student organizations who were prominently denouncing the event. Now, there was one moment in the event where the controversy, or at least part of the controversy, was addressed, and I'll get to that in a second. Before that, I think it's important to stress how this event didn't necessarily focus on defining democracy. At the start, the discussion between him and Dr. Mary Evans, director of the American Democracy Project, did focus on his decision to certify the 2020 election, and we I guess we got a definition of democracy at about the 26-minute timestamp in the recording. I'm going to pull that up here. Okay, I did set it.
This is obviously an election fall, and because of it...
I noticed.
we've noticed. Middle Tennessee State...
I was hoping to be a lot busier right now, to be honest.
Middle Tennessee State University is running a lecture series all fall on democracy, being examined from different perspectives, different disciplinary areas, and lots of different viewpoints. And we had titled today's conversation, Defining Democracy. Now, skipping textbook and political science definitions, I think democracy is something that speaks to the heart of each of us. You define democracy, sir.
Government of the people, by the people, and for the people.
Straight up and simple.
Wow. Yeah, mind blown. Never heard that one before. Never, ever heard that one before. I am amazed at the creativity that he put into this answer. Like, y'all, this was what the school was hyping up. This? I hope that wasn't a mind-blowing answer for the audience, because just about everyone has heard that quote from Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. But I'll ignore the mind-numbing simplicity of that answer. Sure, it was accurate. Now, the discussion could have ended there, and we could have just gone straight to audience questions. Like, we got our definition of democracy. Mission accomplished. Yeah? No. Apparently, there's more to discuss beyond that. And if we're at about the half-hour mark, that would mean we've got about 45 minutes to go, or I guess a half hour, because I think the audience questions start about a half hour in. Either way, you get the picture. We still have a lot more to discuss, apparently, despite achieving the main goal of this whole shindig. So, how did they fill that time up? Well, we got, and I'll be generous to Mike Pence here, a tepid endorsement of the presidential immunity concept that the Supreme Court recently ruled in favor of.
And obviously, Articles 1, 2, and 3 describe this tripartite system that was established for us to forever be in tension with each other, so that each branch of government would oversee and counter the others. And in a very recent Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity, it was pretty well decided that the official acts of the president can be considered immune from any kind of prosecution. What's your own understanding of this, and what do you think that was in terms of the framers' intent in granting such powers?
Well, Alexander Hamilton said in one of the Federalist Papers that they had conceived of what he called an energetic executive. And I certainly served alongside one. But honestly, the founders they didn't want a system, a parliamentary system, where the president would be just another member of the legislature, but it'd be separate, but the ability to take action and then essentially be held accountable with the other branches of the government. And I would submit to you that the Supreme Court's recent decision, while it has its detractors, I greatly respect.
You think it was a correct decision?
Well, I greatly respect the majority's decision in the sense that having served alongside a president for 4 years, that the president's making decisions about America's role in the world, about issues literally on a day-to-day, hour-by-hour basis. And you would not want a president to be concerned about having to answer in a court of law for official acts that he was taking in connection with his duties. Now, what the court has challenged lower courts to do now is determine what was official and what wasn't. But with regard to the president acting as president, I think there's a real argument for whoever the man or woman is that's sitting in the Oval Office, that they would be able to focus on the job and understand that much in the way that we have immunity for other public officials, notably law enforcement officers, that when they're discharging their duty within the law and acting under their authority, we understand that they need protection from the law. Now, that being said, on the specific case involved, and even my own role in some of the current case, what I can tell you is I've been very clear over the last year and a half that I've never hesitated to say that on January 6th, President Trump was wrong. I had no right to overturn the election. I had no right to return Electoral College votes to the states or to reject votes. But I always would have preferred.
Yes, slay, Mike Pence! You did the bare minimum! Thank you so much, sir! Oh, God. I can't handle that. Yeah, so he, quote-unquote, greatly respects that decision, the Supreme Court decision that allows the president to be granted legal immunity for official acts. He claims, "You would not want a president to be concerned about having to answer in a court of law for official acts that he was taking in connection with his duties." You can call me a radical for saying this, but I would like for my president to be held accountable in a court of law for his official acts, like literally any other person in power should be. As an example, he brings up immunity for law enforcement officers, as if that should be justification to give the same privilege to the fucking president. Mike Pence is saying that's a good thing and saying, hey, you know, maybe we should use that to justify giving the same kind of privilege to the president. Democracy defined. I cannot stress the blatant insanity of this event. We invited a guy to be interviewed in front of our entire campus community about his views on democracy. But what he is clearly articulating only 5 minutes after giving that definition, which again, very basic, generic definition that literally everyone else has heard before. After giving that definition, that's a blatant middle finger to the definition that he just gave. Democracy is of the people, by the people, and for the people. But also the guy who the people chose to lead the country for 4 years, yeah, he doesn't need to be held accountable in a court of law. And again, we invited this guy onto our campus to define democracy. We gave him that privilege. He gets asked a question on the effectiveness of the congressional impeachment process, to which he says, well, the ultimate check in America is the vote of the American people. Yeah, unfortunately, when the means by which the American people are informed in casting their vote are increasingly being manipulated by wealthy interests, whether that be through the pro-establishment bias held by prominent news outlets or through social media companies, oligopolistic control of recommendation algorithms on their platforms, that ultimate check has lost its effectiveness. And really, after that, this event turns into something different entirely. We get questions about his advice to J.D. Vance, his thoughts on the most important issue or issues this election year, his thoughts on the war in Ukraine. I mean, suddenly we go from an event on defining democracy to an event in which Mike Pence just gives his hot takes. And while most of that featured asinine answers from Pence at best and downright stupid answers at worst, we did finish up the main discussion with a relatively hard-hitting answer, or not answer, but question from Dr. Evans, in which she does at least address part of the student organization's concerns with this event. And I'm probably going to need to cut here because your boy got to skip ahead a little bit. Yeah, we'll just go here.
In our audience who would like to pose them to Vice President Pence, but in sort of honor of our students and in recognition of the fact that there has been commentary floating around Middle Tennessee over the last weeks about Vice President Pence's coming here. And because our students are an open-minded and creative group of amazing young people whom I support with my heart and soul and mind, I have to ask a question for them, sir, which I hope you'll take in the spirit of respect with which I pose it.
Sure.
Of a certain age have seen a lot of change in the course of our lifetimes in terms of our attitudes about the LGBTQ community. And also, there has been an enormous amount of change legally that benefits gay marriage and has made that a possibility in the United States. We are a more open and accepting and loving nation because of it. And yet, our students have somehow felt fearful about your coming here. I'd love for you to give them a sense of reassurance about your acceptance of them and that your desire that they be given full and equal rights in the United States of America, because they feel fearful, and I want to express that fear for them.
Well, I appreciate that, Dr. Evans, and the thoughtful way you asked it. Thank you.
I'm just going to make a side note here. Dr. Evans, despite, as I kind of noted with the MT Lambda post, which I know I kind of displayed it here at the start, but for those who are listening to the audio-only version and didn't get a chance to, listen to any of my commentary beforehand, the American Democracy Project really didn't have much say in who was going to be showing up for this event, like who ended up getting invited for this event. It's a whole thing because technically they're a student organization, but really in reality they're actually an honors college organization, and so it was really three administrators who I'll harp on more here in a second, who made the decision to have Mike Pence come onto our campus. Dr. Evans is the director of the American Democracy Project, and I've heard a lot of other things just behind the scenes, but I don't want to be spreading gossip, especially about someone who I've personally had in class before. I've been in one of her classes. It was our honors research seminar, and I think I might have actually shared the research paper on here that... No, that's right. Yeah, I read the research paper that I wrote for that class on the honorable series, the series I'm doing for my honors thesis. So I just want to note, Dr. Evans, despite all my criticisms of this event, I think Dr. Evans and really everyone in the American Democracy Project was kind of put between a rock and a hard place, and I think, at least with regards to the American Democracy Project, I think they did the best that they could given the situation. So I just want to kind of make my respect and appreciation for Dr. Evans while I'm doing this segment. And I think that moment right there just really kind of demonstrates why I do have that respect for her. So anyways.
I would just say to anyone that is in that community, it was the greatest honor of my life to be your vice president.
On behalf of the LGBTQ plus community, I'd like to say it was one of the greatest dishonors of our lifetime to have you be our vice president.
And for my part, I think, as I said when I was governor, and you can read about it in my book, So Help Me God, available at all good bookstores and the lobby. I remember we had a controversy in Indiana when I was governor, and I stood up in front of the people of my state. And I said, no one should ever be mistreated or abused because of who they are, who they love, or what they believe.
We'll talk about
that in a
second.
I believe that with all my heart.
We'll fact check this.
I don't support discrimination against any American, and I hope my career is reflective of that.
Yeah, his career is not reflective of that whatsoever. This is where I turn to a 2017 article from Rolling Stone. Where am I looking for? All right, here it is. Quote, Mike Pence became president of the Indiana Policy Review Foundation, a conservative think tank, and began publishing his thoughts online. He wrote some real doozies, like coming out as a climate change denialist. Quote, global warming is a myth. There, I said it, unquote. And a cigarette denialist. Quote, despite the hysteria from the political class and the media, smoking doesn't kill, unquote. He became a board member of the Indiana Family Institute, an anti-abortion, anti-gay organization that pronounced the protest movement that formed after the brutal 1998 murder of gay teen Matthew Shepard to be homosexual activist, quote-unquote, propaganda. Further down here, already, quote, in 2000, Pence made another bid for Congress. He checked the GOP boxes for cutting taxes while increasing military spending. But he also made it clear he was a Christian warrior, stating, quote, Congress should oppose any effort to recognize homosexuals as a discrete and insular minority entitled to the protection of anti-discrimination laws, unquote. He also argued that the AIDS Resources Bill, commonly known as the Ryan White Care Act, should be renewed only if resources were, quote, directed towards those institutions which provide assistance to those seeking to change their sexual behavior, unquote. While Pence has argued that providing assistance to those seeking to change their sexual behavior meant abstinence groups, many gay activists heard code words for, quote, conversion therapy, unquote. I'm just going to continue. In 2006, he spoke in favor of a constitutional amendment defining marriage as between a man and a woman, arguing that, quote, societal collapse was always brought about following an advent of the deterioration of marriage and family, unquote. Now, that's just an overview of some earlier moments in Pence's career that should dash his hopes for his career to reflect opposition to discrimination. Now, this article goes in depth on a more recent controversy from 2015. Quote, within political circles, the coupling of ACLU activist Katie Blair and Republican consultant Megan Robertson represents a symbol of Indiana stepping out of the Paleozoic era. I met with Blair and Robertson at Lockerbie Pub, a dingy but homey place in downtown Indianapolis. Both are from rural parts of the Midwest, but on opposite sides of the aisle. They got to know each other in 2013 as Blair worked to kill the state amendment prohibiting gay marriage alongside Robertson, then director of Freedom Indiana, an LGBTQ advocacy group. They were married in November. That's cute. Quote, we had no idea that Mike Pence was about to blow up the state, says Blair. As 2015 began, a court case legalizing gay marriage loomed before the United States Supreme Court. Sensing it might be passed, Indiana Christian right leaders Indiana Christian right leaders, including Kurt Smith, head of the Indiana Family Institute, where Pence was once a board member, got behind the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, a bill that essentially would allow business-owning Hoosiers to discriminate against gay customers. It had widespread GOP support, and Pence saw it as a consolation prize, since the Supreme Court was likely to make the right's quest for an anti-gay amendment pointless. He told opponents the bill wasn't anti-gay, merely pro-religious freedom. And then the photograph came out. It featured Pence signing RFRA, this act that this article mentions, signing RFRA into law, surrounded by monks and nuns in habits, and the three men of the Indiana right apocalypse: Indiana Family Institute's Smith, Micah Clark of the American Family Association of Indiana, and Advance America's Eric Miller. The press was not allowed. Smith has said homosexuality is outlawed in the Bible along with adultery and bestiality. Clark once was a proponent of gay conversion therapy, and Miller claimed that ministers and priests could be imprisoned for preaching against homosexuality. The photo was so egregious that when a Democratic state representative began circulating it, colleagues complimented him on his photoshopping skills. Quote, "I was upset about RFRA, and then the photo came out, and I was just like, what the hell?" says Robertson. Blair was less circumspect. Quote, "There are a few times in my life where I've been that angry. It was stupid and offensive," unquote. Within days, an economic tsunami crashed down on Pence. Osterly and other local leaders stated that they were unlikely to add workers to their Indiana businesses as long as RFRA remained in place. Conventions began pulling out hundreds of thousands of dollars in business like they did when North Carolina passed similarly phobic legislation, a figure that could grow significantly higher over a year or two of canceled conventions. The NCAA, headquartered in Indianapolis, proclaimed its displeasure. As the story went national, Pence was invited on This Week with George Stephanopoulos. His advisors counseled against the appearance, and Pence agreed. But somewhere along the line, Pence changed his mind. What followed was one of the most embarrassing performances by a politician on national television this decade. Stephanopoulos asked a simple question. Quote, "So yes or no, if a florist in Indiana refuses to serve a gay couple at their wedding, is that legal now in Indiana?" Pence responded, I'm bumping into the table here where my mic is at. My apologies to our listeners. Pence responded, quote, "George, this is where the debate has gone, with misinformation. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act has been on the books for more than 20 years. It does not apply, George, to disputes between individuals unless government action is involved," unquote. Stephanopoulos pointed out RFRA supporters were stating the law would protect Christian florists from having to sell flowers to a gay wedding. Quote, "Governor, is that true or not?" unquote. Pence danced some more. Quote, "The issue is tolerance a two-way street or not?" he said. Pence never answered the question and passed up two chances to say he was not in favor of discrimination against gay people. The interview ended with Pence insisting he would not be revisiting the law. Back home, lawmakers and staffers despaired. Quote, "I thought he has just ended his career," says a prominent lobbyist. Quote, "And the state was going to get creamed to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. The situation that we were scared of before he went on TV just got exponentially worse. The city was burning," unquote. That Tuesday, the Indianapolis Star, not a liberal paper, published a block headline screaming, "Fix this now." There was fear Indiana was on its way to becoming, like North Carolina, a convention dead zone. The civic leaders of Indiana called 2 meetings, one featuring Osterly, I hope I'm pronouncing that name right, and other business leaders, the other starring local politicos. Pence was not at either meeting. That week, the legislature passed a revised bill that weakened the anti-gay language enough that the conventions came back. And Pence's role? Non-existent, as recounted in the charmingly titled Decide, a book published last year by Pence's Christian ally, Kurt Smith. Quote, I heard his chief of staff comment, "Governor, I don't think we have any opportunity to negotiate," unquote. So, if anyone has any doubts, no, Pence's career did not feature any commitment to protecting the LGBTQ plus community from discrimination. Dr. Evans did not push back on that, which, in fairness, probably stemmed from a desire to leave enough time for people to ask questions. For those who aren't listening to for those who aren't watching the video, that last question I kind of skipped a lot further along into the event. This is actually the question I think they asked right before they got into the audience Q&A portion. So, anyways, she might have not pushed back on him just because she was wanting to make sure that we had enough time for the audience Q&A portion. Nonetheless, I definitely wanted to make sure that the record was corrected on this show. Funny enough, he kind of undermines his whole bit in this next sentence.
That being said, there have been major changes in the law, as you said, and changes that I didn't agree with. You know, you may have picked up already. I've often said over the years, I'm a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. As a Bible-believing Christian, I believe that marriage is between one man and one woman. That's what's free.
First, I love that he's promoting his support for traditional marriage as if anyone is arguing that we should outlaw traditional marriage. Second, I also love the fact that he thinks his Christian faith inherently dictates some higher affinity for traditional over homosexual marriage. Newsflash, there are plenty of Christian religions that support same-sex marriage. Pew Research put out this little chart in 2015 that documents this adequately. As you can see here, there's like the Episcopal Church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. You got the Presbyterian Church. You've also got the Unitarian Universalist Association of Churches and the United Church of Christ. So that is not something that all Christian faiths agree with. But anyways, let's move on to the questions portion of the event. First, before I mention my question or get into that, I do want to give a shout out to this guy who asked a question to Pence regarding his support for Israel. I will need to skip ahead here a little bit. What time am I looking at? 1:11:42. This will be good.
Binyat Karadaki, I'm a history major. Thank you very much for being here. Quick question. So you talked about the aggressions of China, of Russia, and I don't know if you've heard there's another country that's killed 40,000 people in the last year. So it seems that the Republican Party and the Christian conservatives are, of course, they're religiously attached to this country of Israel, but I was wondering how, why no one has said anything about this, why the war criminal can come to Congress and everyone will clap for him except maybe a couple people. Just how do you think this is morally possible from a human perspective, from an American perspective, from a Christian perspective? Because, this is just, it's ridiculous. I mean, just
boom.
objectively.
Nice. Fucking nice. Nice.
Number one, thank you for the thoughtful questions and for your compassion. I visited Israel in January. I went to a kibbutz where there was still bullet holes riddled in the wall of every home, blood on the carpet. And I heard firsthand from people that were there on that day, October 7th, about the abject slaughter that took place when Hamas, who I believe victimizes their own people, this was actually just in a major newspaper a couple of days ago, that they use violence and intimidation, not just in Gaza over the years, but also in the West Bank to literally victimize the Palestinian people and keep them in line. But the fact that Hamas on October 7th is not widely known. It was not just a terrorist attack, it was a terrorist invasion. There was about 90 different points along the fence line of Gaza and Israel. They came across with motorized vehicles with one objective, and that was to kill as many Jews as they possibly could. And it was a day of unspeakable horror. I stopped by the field where the music festival was taking place. A lot of people, the age of people in this room, who literally watched as Hamas terrorists arrived, some of them by air on gliders and some of them on motorcycles, and they literally brutalized and murdered people by the hundreds at this music festival. It was a day of unspeakable horror and terror. And for my part, I have, and you alluded to it, at least with my case. I've often said, if the world knows nothing else, the world should know this: America stands with Israel, and standing with Israel in this moment.
Those boos, they are beautiful.
Standing with Israel in this moment means standing with Israel as they have engaged in urban warfare in Gaza, where Hamas literally has taken foreign aid of the last 20 years and built hundreds of miles of tunnels and infrastructure that still house some hostages or their remains at this hour. And so I think Israel has no choice but to defeat Hamas. But I grieve for the loss of life that's taken place in Gaza. I grieve for the victims, the innocent men, women, and children who've been caught up in the fighting. But I think Israel has no choice in this moment than to hunt down and destroy Hamas, that has demonstrated its utter mendacity and brutality. And once that's done, then I guarantee you, I'll be first in line to say, let's make sure that the resources are there for the people in the Palestinian community in the West Bank and in Gaza to rebuild their cities, rebuild their lives. And I make that promise to you. I will.
Miss Lee?
Thank you for
those boos, those cheers for free Palestine. Those were beautiful. Go Blue Raiders. Go Blue Raiders. So, yeah, that's a horrendous answer from Mike Pence. He emphasizes the horrors of October 7th, which, by the way, literally no one denies. Yes, claims about Hamas's use of sexual assault as a weapon of war. Yes, a few individual Hamas militants raped people, but claims of Hamas's use of rape as a tactical weapon in mass have been debunked by outlets like The Intercept. That said, according to France24.com, republishing a wire from, and I'm probably going to butcher this, I've heard of this outlet before, but I've only seen the acronym AFP. Apparently it stands for Agence France Presse. It's basically like the French version of the Associated Press. It's an international news wire agency. So according to this article from France 24, nearly 700 civilians were killed on October 7th out of the total 1,200. Now, there are a few asterisks to that number. The article notes that both active and off-duty soldiers were included in the military casualty counts, so you could make the argument that the number of non-combatants killed on October 7th was higher, perchance. Further, the number does not distinguish how many of these kills were committed by Hamas members and Israeli soldiers. Now, I'm not going to delve too much into this, but I'll drop a link to a Haaretz article on the importance of that distinction. The use of this IDF directive called the Hannibal Procedure or Hannibal Directive basically ordered IDF troops to attack vehicles returning to Gaza on October 7th, meaning would-be hostages may have been killed by Israeli troops that day. Now, all of that is to say, yes, October 7th was a blatant atrocity committed by Hamas. Thank you for the enlightening commentary, Pence. Unfortunately, you didn't answer the guy's question. How the fuck do you justify the slaughter of over 40,000 people in response to an attack that left 1,200 people dead? Of course, Pence only responds with boilerplate statements on America's unshakable relationship with Israel, its right to defend itself, amounting to nothing but a mindless argument that supports an apartheid state's plausible genocide. And I'm going to stress this again for the billionth time on this show. My characterization of Israel as an apartheid state and its bombardment of the Gaza Strip as a plausible genocide are not my words. Those came from the International Court of Justice. You got a problem with those words? You can bring it up with that legitimate institution. Another note I'd like to add. I love that the student at least brought the issue of the plausible genocide in Gaza up to Pence's face, but I would have handled it a bit differently. The event is titled Defining Democracy, so a more effective tactic in questioning him would be to tie that issue to the subject of democracy. Now, there are at least two ways I can think of in which he could have done this. Number one, we at the YDSA mentioned this in our post. According to Open Secrets, Pence took over $200,000 from pro-Israel interest groups throughout his entire congressional career. So, at best, Pence chose to make it more difficult for himself to reconsider his position on Israel, and at worst, Pence sold his decrepit soul to yet another special interest. In other words, he was paid to take this position by pro-Israel interest groups like AIPAC, whether or not he has the Democratic support from the people on that position. The second way you could have tied it to the sort of the focus of the event, or at least the claimed focus of the event, the ideology that Pence is espousing in this clip, and one that he has supported throughout his career, is that of Zionism. I actually discussed this in the first episode that I uploaded to the kennel. Zionism is inherently an undemocratic ideology, which advocates for the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. This comes from a 2021 Brookings Institute article. Quote, there it is. Advocating for Israel specifically as a Jewish state, directly and indirectly, conflicts with the notion that states should represent and treat all their citizens equally, which is at the heart of democracy, an issue that Biden has made central for his administration and its foreign policy. First, there is the obvious issue of a citizen's sense of belonging to a state defined in terms that exclude them. More centrally, this formulation privileges Jewishness, even of non-citizens, over citizenship of non-Jews in some important ways. For example, a Jew who is a non-citizen with no relatives in Israel and no direct connection to the state or to the land, has the automatic right to citizenship and to assets bestowed by the state to go along with it, while a relative, even a spouse of a non-Jewish citizen of Israel, does not have a similar right. So there were a couple of ways to tie it directly, his question directly, to the purpose of the event, and metaphorically, kick Pence in the groin a bit harder. That said, I'm still very glad to see that someone asked this question to Pence's face because, well, it's kind of important right now. Just a little bit. Just a tad. I actually considered asking him a question on that subject, but I decided to go for the Iraq War. While polls show that the majority of the public wants us to cut off aid to Israel, as I noted in my first show this semester, I figured that tying it to the Iraq War would be a little more appealing to people. And to my credit, Pence, at the very least, seemed a little more queasy having to address that subject. For those who don't know, this issue, that of money and politics, it's one that's near and dear to my heart. The main purpose of my podcast, The Kennel, is to interview candidates who aren't taking any corporate PAC money. I don't take too kindly to any politician who's yucking it up with wealthy donors. Mike Pence is a prime example of one of those disgusting freaks in our government. And I made sure to let him know that directly to his smug little face.
Yes, sir.
You advocated for the invasion of Iraq while taking over $300,000 throughout your entire congressional career from oil and gas companies and defense contractors who profited from that war of aggression, which resulted in at least 186,000 killed civilians, over 4,500 U.S. soldiers killed, and $2 trillion in wasted taxpayer dollars. You define democracy as of the people, by the people, and for the people. But it's clear that you're owned by corporations like the majority of our legislators. Did you take that money, then arrive at your position, or were you always dying to see the U.S. invade another country and then took the money to make it more difficult for you to reconsider your position?
For those listening to the audio-only version, Mike Pence makes a momentary silent chuckle right after I ask my question. It's kind of like a like just a very slight little chuckle. Now, the best faith interpretation of that, this dude knew he got cornered and was trying to ease some internal tension that he was experiencing. Worst faith interpretation of that little chuckle, he literally laughed at being asked why he supported a war that everyone today looks at as a blatant atrocity, while taking money from the very groups that profited from that atrocity. Now, I'll admit up front, I took a ton of time writing this question to make it painful for him to answer. I wanted to make sure it was worded in a very specific way to make it difficult as hell for him to weasel his way out by giving a standard cop-out of an answer to this sort of question. My favorite podcaster, Kyle Kalinske, he's noted in various segments on his show how there's this chicken and the egg conundrum to the issue of money in politics. Do politicians come by their positions honestly and then take corporate-backed donations, or do these politicians take the money and let that decide their positions? While I'm sure both of those things happen with different politicians, even in the case of the former, where the politicians do come by their position honestly, I still argue that a softer form of corruption exists in those circumstances. In those cases, did the money direct them to their position? No, but it does make it more difficult for that politician to reconsider their position when new evidence appears that contradicts that position. For instance, Pence, as you just saw, despite being given a well-known fact about Israel's actions in Gaza, that Well over 40,000 people have been killed by Israel as a result of its incessant bombing. All he did was emphasize the horrors of October 7th and said nothing about what the student posed to him, and said nothing about the bloodthirsty and genocidal statements that numerous Israeli officials have made since October 7th, among ignoring other bits of information that is well known by the public at this point. And there is material pressure applied to Pence to hold his current position. As I just said, he took over $200,000 from pro-Israel interest groups throughout his congressional career. And that's not including his time as governor or his time as vice president. He might have come by that position on Israel, honestly, but despite the overwhelming evidence that Israel is out of fucking control and must have its weapons shipments cut off, he still won't budge. And I think it's because he knows that he owes his career, in part, to the pro-Israel individuals and political action committees who helped to make sure that he had the money he needed to stay in power. So I say all of that because if I had simply asked him, why did you take this money and then support the Iraq war, he could have copped out by saying, oh, I came to my position and then took the money, or that money doesn't affect my decision making. I wanted to make sure he could not get off scot-free like that. So I phrased that question specifically. Did you take the money, then arrive at your position, or were you always wanting to invade another country and then took the money to make it more difficult for you to reconsider your position? Now, some might say, come on, big dog, unfair question. That's a false dichotomy. Okay, well, Pence can call that out too. He could just say, neither. The money I take doesn't affect my positions, and then move on. But he didn't really do that. Instead, he rambles, makes himself look like an ass, and doesn't even answer the question that clearly. And I should note, thank you to everyone who clapped for that, by the way, that, again, go Blue Raiders. Go Blue Raiders. Y'all are very informed.
I arrived in Congress in 2001 when I was a freshman member of Congress. There was a day in September in 2001 that happened. It was before you were born.
Oh, gee. A day in September 2001? Yes, because I don't have a personal experience of 9/11. Obviously, that means I don't know what the fuck it was, and I need a corporate shill like you to explain it to me. Thank you, Mike Pence, for bestowing your Wait, that's not the word I'm looking for. Man, what is it? Oh, yeah. Your fucking condescending attitude towards a student who, again, asked you about your indulging in legal bribes. Now, for some reason, I felt the need to correct the record. I was actually born in 2000, so I was actually 1 year old. It's kind of a weird moment, but nonetheless, we'll continue.
Oh, good. You made the cut.
Just had to cut him off there.
So let me rephrase. Back when you were 1.
Oh, man.
And I want to be very respectful of you. I can tell you very sincere.
He's not. He's not being respectful. Or
my support for the use of military force in Afghanistan was because Afghanistan harbored al-Qaeda.
I didn't say a fucking word about Afghanistan. Didn't say a goddamn word about Afghanistan. I asked you about Iraq. But please, Mike Pence, you can keep dancing around this question. I said this in our WMTS Discord server. If ABC, like the network, decided to do like a spinoff of Dancing with the Stars called Dancing Around the Question, yeah, Mike Pence would easily win season 1.
That attacked our country. I was at the Pentagon the day after it was hit. I was at Ground Zero a week later. I have been to Shanksville and spoken there as vice president. But I went there before there was any
congrats,
memorial
bro.
in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where the first battle in the war on terror was fought in the air over Pennsylvania.
Again, I asked him about
Our
his
nation was
indulging in
attacked.
bribes.
And I supported giving President Bush the authority to send our troops in to hunt down and find those that attacked our nation. With regard to the war in Iraq, we went through the same process, and history
Finally getting
now
around to that.
records that the intelligence we received about there being weapons of mass destruction possessed by Iraq was never proven or was even false.
Wow, cool story, bro. Except for the fact, according to a 2016 HuffPost article, that you admitted a month before voting for the Iraq resolution on CNN that, quote, under pushback, he, Pence, conceded that there was no proof of such a tie between Iraq and Al-Qaeda. But he maintained that there was, quote, overwhelming evidence to suggest a connection, unquote. Now, this may sound crazy. This may sound very crazy. But I personally would be a bit cautious to vote for an invasion of another country based on evidence that only suggests a connection. So even at the time, Pence knew that evidence wasn't concrete, yet he still voted for a resolution that granted the Bush administration broad authority to invade another country. And again, he did that while raking in campaign donations from oil companies and defense contractors who profited from that war of aggression. Because of that, it's a hell of a lot more difficult to give you the benefit of the doubt and chalk your reasoning up to an honest mistake.
But I would just encourage you, and I'm a student of history. You might be able to tell.
I'd like to note, he notes multiple times about how he's a student of history. I'm a student of history. If you're having to make that, like, if you're having to say that explicitly over and over again, which he did do throughout this event, chances are you're probably not terribly confident in your credibility to that regard. I'm just going to throw that out there. Anyways.
We're living in a time when we couldn't wait for the world to come and hit us anymore. We had to make sure, if there were threats against the United States of America, that we were dealing with those threats.
But that's the same logic that justified our boondoggles in Vietnam, Cambodia, Bay of Pigs, as well as our funding or direct support of right-wing fascist entities like those in El Salvador, Peru, the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. It's always, we have to strike first to protect ourselves. And that justification never works out in the end. But again, Pence is too indebted to the oil companies and defense contractors who supported his career to at least admit, shouldn't have done that. We jumped the gun. Sorry, y'all. Ugh.
Said we believe that Saddam Hussein, who had expressed great hostility to the United States since we defeated him in the first Persian Gulf War when he attacked a neighbor, was potentially a threat to our country, and I supported the effort to move against him. I would just say to you with great respect, too, that one of the things I've tried to do in my life is not question people's motives. Hear them out first.
Hear him out first. I'm going to touch on that in a second. I've listened back to that moment tens, if not hundreds of times since I heard him say that. I've constantly thought to myself, did a former vice president just admit that he tried to not question people's motives throughout his life? Well, it's no wonder this numbskull voted for the Iraq War. Guys, George Bush said Saddam Hussein helped bin Laden do 9/11. Let's go to war! In other words, this guy, a former VP, just admitted he actively tries not to question why other people do the things that they do. If you're predisposed to not questioning people's motives, you got no fucking place being in any position of power. Oh, is that another $10,000 from an oil company's political action committee? Wonderful! I'll take this money and assume you're just giving it to me out of nothing but generosity. So, basically what he is implicitly admitting there, at least, as a way of answering my question, is that he's not corrupt. He's just fucking stupid. And that's assuming he's actually being honest on that subject. That's one way of interpreting it, I guess. I'm sure there's a hell of a lot more to unpack there. I almost shudder to think about all the stuff that he just mindlessly ignored while being a congressional representative, governor, and then vice president. Oh, and yeah, I also shouldn't forget to note that he tells me to hear people out first while I am literally standing there hearing out his bullshit answer. Jesus fucking Christ.
People who have supported me over the years have supported me because they support the positions I take, not that I support the positions they take. So, this is literal nonsense. I'm moving the scissors over so I don't accidentally poke myself. People have supported me because of the positions I take, not because I support the positions they take. If they support you for your positions, inherently they share their positions with you. I mean, maybe he's trying to say that he doesn't support all the positions that they take, but still, that doesn't really answer my question. Why did you take all this money from these companies who profited from the Iraq War and then ardently advocated for it even after it became clear that we never should have been there? Really, the closest answer we're going to get from him to that effect is that he just took the money and didn't question the donor's motives. So he's saying he was stupid, but doesn't even seem to recognize how unethical that looks. And he certainly doesn't seem to understand that essentially makes him nothing more than a mere tool of corporate interests. Y'all, I'm going to stress this again. This guy was our vice president, and he just blatantly admitted that he took money from all these corporate interests and never thought, why are these people giving me all of this money? And again, our university invited this self-admitted corporate stooge to lecture us about democracy. Oh, Christ. And I would just submit to you that I stand by those decisions, even though the Iraq War, and when I was in Congress, because I voted to give the president authority to send our troops into battle, I made a point to go visit troops in Afghanistan or Iraq every year for 10 years. And as a governor, I traveled overseas. As vice president, I was the first member of our administration to travel into Iraq and Afghanistan to visit our troops. I mean, the men and women of our military today are the finest people in this country. And, I'm proud to have stood with them. I'm proud of the work that they have done. I grieve the loss of life of families of service members, but ultimately believed it was the right decisions that we made at the time.
No regret expressed. None. 186,000 civilians killed, 4,500 U.S. troops killed, $2 trillion in taxpayer funds wasted. And he still stands by that decision. Again, he was reminded on CNN in front of the public only a month before he had to make that vote that we still did not have clear evidence directly tying Saddam Hussein to Al-Qaeda. So after all that, I don't know whether to label this guy as a liar or a simply honest and brutally stupid man. there are two conclusions I can come to after this circus advertised as some high-minded celebration of democracy. One, this event further convinces me that what I do on the Kennel exclusively, not here on WNTS, but on the Kennel exclusively, interviewing candidates who reject corporate PAC money, that's not only the correct thing for me to keep doing, but it's the kind of perspective that every other news outlet should be considering. I mean, why the fuck should anyone trust what you have to say when you're taking tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars from corporations and wealthy donors? If you're doing that, you're not going to represent the average American if your career depends upon the support of wealthy elites. You're going to support the rich motherfuckers who keep you relevant, who keep your career afloat. And I'm not going to waste your time, you, the listener. I'm not going to waste your time interviewing those kinds of hacks. I'll interview candidates who actually deserve to be heard out by the public. For instance, Matt Ferry, Afton Bain, or last election cycle, I had on Odessa Kelly. I had on Trish Gumby, who was running for Congress from my home district in the St. Louis, Missouri County area. I also had a guy stop by the Kennel whose legal name, kid you not, was Santa Claus. He ran for office in Alaska for the U.S. House of Representatives. Point being is, this event further cemented for me why I do what I do. Corporate shills like Mike Pence don't deserve those kinds of interviews. They deserve to be mocked at by the American public. And I think it should be up to our news media to highlight those differences between the fuckheads like Mike Pence and the more honest candidates like the ones you'll find interviewed on the Kennel. Number two, as I noted in the preview that I uploaded for this episode last Tuesday, I should probably pull that up. All right, there, I got it pulled up now. So as I noted in this preview that I uploaded last Tuesday, the one where I just uploaded the clip of my question to Mike Pence, this event was a goddamn shit show. Now, to be clear, there are obviously still people who express satisfaction with the fact that we had a former vice president come onto our campus. And here's the thing. If this event focused on something else that Mike Pence actually could speak about with some semblance of credibility, I would share that sentiment. Say, for instance, if the event was titled How to Live Your Life Without Questioning Anyone's Motives, or How to Sleep at Night After Supporting a War That Left 186,000 civilians dead, 4,500 of your own troops dead, and $2 trillion of taxpayer funds wasted, then yeah, I would totally support having Mike Pence be the guest of honor at one of those events, because clearly he has a lot of expertise and credibility on those subjects. But inviting him to speak to an academic community about defining democracy, that's nothing but a goddamn circus. So with that in mind, I'm more or less going to reiterate what I wrote in that post last week. To the three MTSU administrators, I identified in MT Lambda's Instagram post who organized this event, those being Honors College Dean Dr. John Vile, Provost Mark Burns, and President Sidney McPhee. You invited a homophobic, corrupt, and bloodthirsty psychopath onto our campus, framing the event as some academic and enlightened celebration of democracy. You framed this event as an American Democracy Project event, despite the people running the organization seemingly having no say in the planning of the event. When faced with valid and accurate criticisms of the event, you responded in the press in a manner that didn't even address those criticisms, justifying the event by saying, "Free speech, free speech, free speech!" And also, he defended democracy, that one time. That especially was insulting to everyone's intelligence. This is not about free speech. This is about whether MTSU should have invited Mike Pence to speak on our campus. The justification of free speech would justify having Donald Trump come lecture us about quantum physics, or having Joe Rogan come lecture us about vaccines. This is not about free speech. This is about whether Mike Pence should have been given the privilege of addressing our students at an event of this nature. And as I hope this segment demonstrates, the event proved that he should not have been granted that honor. Which leads me to the most undeniable and devastating result of this event. It undermined many of the core values of the primary institutions who organized and promoted this event, those being MTSU and its Honors College. The Honors College building has these virtues inscribed on its north-facing wall, which come directly from its mission statement on its website. Quote, character, creativity, commitment, curiosity, discipline, faith, honor, and integrity. The man you invited to be interviewed on our theater's stage last Tuesday demonstrated no character, only the silhouette of the one we already knew. He bragged about his refusal to overturn the 2020 election, which, again, to be clear, that was good, but it was also the bare minimum. And he had nothing to say about his enjoyment of legal bribes from wealthy donors other than, I just don't question people's motives. He demonstrated no creativity in imagining a political system that actually embraces democracy instead of painting a cheap facade of it, which allows the people to vote, but places so many barriers to ensure that their voice only gets heard to a minimal extent, especially with such a system's allowance for unlimited financial contributions to campaigns. Sure, one could say that he demonstrated commitment to his faith when using it to justify that traditional marriage between a man and a woman needed to be defended, but at the same time, there's really no honor in generally asserting that your interpretation of Christianity is a matter of fact, and one that is shared by every other Christian, or at least every other Christian religion, when in reality, not all branches of Christianity share his perspective. And there certainly was no honor, discipline, or integrity in a blatant and explicit lack of curiosity in questioning other people's motives. That specific curiosity should be critical to any kind of leader, yet Pence clearly has no care for questioning why certain corporate and wealthy interests choose to give him thousands of dollars. The majority of the values inscribed on the Honors College building was given the middle finger as these administrators planned this event. Same goes for MTSU's community standards and values, found on its mission statement page on its website, all the way at the bottom here. Pence displayed no, quote, honesty or integrity in answering my questions about his enjoyment of legal bribes. He also didn't show that kind of honor and integrity toward Dr. Evans' question about his position on LGBTQ plus rights, or the other student's question on his support for Israel. Pence certainly showed no respect for diversity, asserting that traditional marriage is something that is under threat when, in fact, it isn't. And he certainly showed no respect for the diversity of Christian perspectives on homosexuality by citing the Christian religion as a whole as justification for promoting traditional marriage as one that's more valuable or worthy than same-sex marriage. Now, with regards to the engagement in the community value on this mission statement page, I will give Pence this. He did certainly show engagement in our community. staying well past the scheduled end time for the event to answer all the questions from us pesky college students. That said, with regards to this last one, commitment to nonviolence, there was just about none, zero commitment to nonviolence. That one is patently obvious. Not only did he defend an apartheid state's ongoing plausible genocide, he also stood behind his decision to support the Iraq War, knowing full well then and now that the evidence used to justify the invasion was pretty flimsy. The overwhelming majority of both MTSU's and its honors college's values were thoroughly undermined with this event. And on top of that, the school undermined its academic credibility as a whole. Again, doing the bare minimum once in your 20-plus year political career that was propped up with donations from corporations and wealthy individuals does not give you the credibility to speak on democracy in front of an academic community. Ultimately, this event accomplished nothing except for certifying what we already knew, that Mike Pence is a dishonest, homophobic, corrupt, and bloodthirsty hack who's never met a war that he didn't like. So I naively hope that the controversy surrounding the event will encourage administration to consider students' perspectives for next year's Constitution Day event. Next year, that would be nice for them to consider the perspective of the people who ostensibly this annual event is organized for. Hey friend, that's all I've got for today, but thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of The Unnatural State of Affairs. The Unnatural State of Affairs broadcasts on WMTS 88.3 FM in Murfreesboro, Tennessee from 5 to 7 p.m. on Mondays. The broadcasted version is censored, but I do also have a full DJ hour in the broadcasted version. I mostly play punk rock music and some rap music as well. And if you can't tune in at that time, though, you can also find the uncensored versions of all my talk show segments that day on my Substack, The Kennel, and you can also find audio-only versions on Spotify. If you liked what I had to say, hit that like button. If you have any thoughts that you want to share, hit me up in the comments section down below. And if you want to be notified of the next upload that I make, hit that subscribe button. You'll get an email in your inbox the next time I make an upload, and you'll also get a notification through the Substack app if you have that on your device. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a good one.